Get started. All right, everybody, hello and welcome. You are here tonight for the June 2025 Jobs Report and Inflation Update. My name is Albert. I'm the founder of Albert's List. We are a job search, side hustle, and AI education company with the goal of making you indispensable in your career. And as a part of our mandate and as a part of what we do, we also believe that you should be an informed job seeker and an informed professional. And so with me today are my two lovely and trusty co-hosts, Colin Moe, who works as an Albert's List moderator and also is passionate about economics, and Dr. Reilly White, full professor of finance at the University of New Mexico and the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning. I'll be sharing his LinkedIn here in a moment so you can see his full credentials. But he joins us monthly to talk through the numbers, answer your questions, look at the insights, and just understand how crazy everything seems. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, figure out what questions you want to ask. Dr. White, the floor is yours.
All right. Good evening, everybody in the Bay Area and beyond. I'm Reilly White, your professor, talking a little bit today about today's jobs report. Let me bring these slides up for you and begin this. I got a whole bunch of questions in the last week or two from Albert and Colin about things that the audience was interested in hearing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I will never say no to a LinkedIn connection through some one of these attendee events. Happy to connect, happy to answer any questions that you have as well. Also, ask questions in the chat today. If I miss the questions or something else happens, let me know. I'm happy to answer it. This is a train that often derails, and I'm happy when you derail it. So put your pennies on the tracks, and we'll see what happens when we talk a little bit about the topics today, of which there are increasingly a series of increasingly challenging economic issues that we have to discuss. So, but overall, could be worse, as we all say. Here in our monthly jobs report and our typical AI-driven scene, obviously you can tell from the crowd of people wandering about with milling and about with no particular place to go. This is actually in San Jose in the apocalyptic future, not in San Francisco. But we've got some information. We got some stuff we're going to talk about, and we're kind of going to go into this today. So, looking at your state of the economy poll, an impressive number of neutral people here. I like that we've beaten you down into pure indifference about the economy. That's excellent. We've got seven people who are negative, one person that's positive, a single light at the end of the job tunnel. But let's take a look at what we got going on today. And I'm going to change windows a bit here. Hopefully you can see this. I changed my screen settings, put this thing into presentation mode, and now I think we're ready to rock and roll. So, our June 2025 jobs report was weaker. How weak was it? We added about 147,000 jobs. And you're like, oh, that's not a terrible number, Riley. I've seen worse numbers. 147,000 people left Alameda last weekend to move somewhere else. And you're like, no, 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 these aren't bad numbers. But 74,000, only 74,000 were actually in the private sector. Uniquely in this, we had a surge in state and local government hiring as we entered the end of the fiscal year, incidentally, which the interpretation of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other entities like the Economic Policy Institute determined as potentially a fluke. And I tend to agree. State and local government hiring has been picking up for federal hiring in many places, but this is limited by variations in state finances, local finances, and other places. There is a delay, and incidentally, you might be wondering if we cut federal funding and then we add funding in other areas, or actually we cut federal funding, the state and local effects can be somewhat delayed because of the nature of grants and how places are funded. They may not occur at all, and even we're in a recession. There's an article that came out some years back that studied a whole bunch of municipalities during the Great Recession. Municipalities are one of the last things to feel the impressions of or the downsides of a recession due to the nature of how they raise funding from a series of taxes and other things. There's lags there, and so even though the financial crisis reached a hilt in 2008 and early 2009, the article found that many municipalities didn't reach their budgetary nadir until about 2011 or 2012. And so there's a few years of delay there. And so it's not surprising that even given some circumstances here and even some variations in the economy, state and local governments still haven't felt the pinch, so to speak, of the current situation. And as Michael points out, it could be worse. It could be raining. That's absolutely right, Michael. It could be worse. Could physically be raining. This has been a fun ride. Seven sectors are experiencing job losses right now, although relatively minor job losses. Overall, you get a sense that right now, especially in various sectors that you're experiencing, many people here in the information sector, many people in professional and business services, these are not doing well. They've been flatlined for a long time, and in this particular month, we've actually lost some jobs. Private educational services down 8,000, but also across the board, manufacturing, despite the decline that we've seen in the dollar, which typically boosts American exports, local manufacturing, national manufacturing, I should say, has gone down about 7,000. Federal government jobs, of course, dropping again, mining and logging down too. Very modest numbers, nonetheless, but not healthy, not growing. Usually, we could expect for a jobs report to sort of meet our sort of population growth that we've experienced. We should be adding between 150 and 200,000 jobs. When immigration is higher, that number should be more like 250,000 jobs per month. And so this falls below that hurdle and is a sign of clear weakening. And if this continues this month and the following month, we'll have to see. Now, March and February. I want to bring these numbers up again because one thing that happened then, this was not this month they were revised, it was 2 months ago they were revised, but they were revised down. And these revisions that happen, and this is mainly to explain the concept of revisions. So these jobs report data comes from the most recent data that economists have available to estimate the economy. Then they make revisions based on what else happens and what other pieces of information that they can come across. And for us in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, these revisions can trend positive or negative over time. And if we look at the current employment situation and looking at and I want to bring up something very particular too, is that even though we didn't see an increase in our unemployment rate. In fact, unemployment rate dropped slightly to 4.1%. People actually left the labor force. Now, the unemployment rate, or what we call, we have a variation of unemployment rates that run from U1, U2, U3, U4, U5, and U6. U3 is the one that we quote. And what we do to calculate U3 is that we have to take the amount of people who are actively looking for jobs that don't have a job divided by the amount of people in the labor force. And what we have right now, when the labor force drops, people leave, for instance, the market in one way or another. They feel discouraged. Maybe they leave to have a family, or one partner leaves to take care of a child, or many good and bad reasons why people leave the job market. People retire, people do something else, people just leave. But the interesting part is the labor force shrunk, and as a consequence, unemployment, the amount of physical people, the unemployment rate dropped, but artificially speaking, so to speak, because of a decline in our labor force, because the amount of people that were actually unemployed declined, but in response, the labor force also declined with them. So they just dropped out of the labor market. And that's a concern that we have to watch overall. And I think when we think about um, the context of the economy and where we think the economy is going to go, this becomes a key point to bring up because one of the factors that we look at is what we call participation rate, the amount of people who are in the labor force versus the total population. That's remained relatively high for our working age population, around 80%. And looking at numbers for revisions that we've seen lately, the revision change in May was very minor. We revised up about 5,000, and that's the number I just wanted to check really quick. But overall, not an overall stellar jobs market summary right now, which is no surprising to the people here on Albert's List who are searching for jobs, looking for jobs, looking for networking jobs. And it is very hard as well. And as you've seen, and I want to make an acknowledgement too, particularly if you've been an experienced worker who's been out of college for even a few decades and looking at the situation and saying, my goodness, I left job X and it's been so hard to find my next job. Your experience is not alone. The market has been tough for experienced workers, especially in areas like tech. One of the things that we're going to go into next, though, especially for our little tech area, are some of these recent second quarter results that have been coming out that have been actually very interesting. So you have these conflicting hiring information locally. You have companies like Tesla, which are hemorrhaging money because for Elon reasons. And then you've got companies like Google that are doing surprisingly well, both from their search industry, which people are like, the money's going to die there, and that's been doing well. But the really impressive Google Cloud performance in the last few years in terms of the amount of money that they're making. And so we're seeing these tech companies make money, and the question then becomes they aren't hiring. Is this an AI thing? Is this something else that's an issue? And what else is going on here? And there's a lot of variations, and all of those are correct. They're all also a piece of the overall puzzle. But looking at unemployment claims in general, looking at being unemployed, especially over the long run, I want to point out two very interesting charts from the Economic Policy Institute that came out in the last month. One is the continued unemployment claims for federal programs on the left. And the latest 52 weeks are the dark line, and then this dotted line indicates the prior year. And so we were tracking incidentally till basically February back to the previous year. It was a steady state economy. We had a surge of March layoffs, and those layoffs and long-term unemployment numbers have continued. And they've actually continued to start to rise in the last 52 weeks, all the way up into our most recent data in June, up to July, in fact, of this year. And so this spread in between the amount of people we had last year and the year before, these are thousands of people. So we're looking at a difference of 2 million more people who are in continued UI claims versus last year. That's not messing around. That's a significant number. And then if we go to regular state programs, on the other hand, which have a series of different metrics, that increase over last year has been more modest, but it has been consistent. And we also saw that opening up at the beginning of the year, and that's remained open at the beginning of the year. And that's something to really, really consider. So Albert says, what is continuing to be strange is the stagnant job market and a roaring stock market. Yes, exactly. I was on the news yesterday, not like the news, but a local news station called me and said, "What's the deal, Reilly? Why is the stock market doing well and why are people not doing well?" And I said, "We don't know." And I got some more. We're going to talk stock market data in a little bit. There is true, though, to your point, though, there's a little bit of irrational exuberance going on, and markets are pricey and the markets are good, but people are not doing well. Sentiment is low, and there's other issues at stake, including a lot of corporate uncertainty. And I can't even point to corporate profits and say, "Oh, they're making money over hand and fist." There's some mispricing happening, and we're going to talk about where that is and how to find it. Oracle is getting paid 30 billion by OpenAI, as Albert, this is from Albert as well, to have data centers, and OpenAI only makes 10 billion a year. There is a sea of cash. You just have to be in the lucky places. That's true. Tech firms in particular are not at a loss of cash. It's how that cash is deployed and the argument for it's deployed, which is key. And that's amazing. That's a fantastic point. Colin says, what happens if we overlay, H-1B visa numbers on this chart? There's a theory that all the profits and jobs are being offshored to India are being given to H-1B visas because the workers are significantly easier to control. What's your take on this theory? And I'm not in a position where I can say that this doesn't happen, even though I can be like, "Oh, we don't do that here." And for instance, as I work for a university, I'm an administrator at a university, and a lot of the times we struggle. We always find the best candidate. We send people out, and a lot of our candidates for professorships, especially in places like finance, very technical stuff, are from other countries. And it's very hard to get visas and maintain visas in this environment, to your point. But to that point, it's not also likely to happen. Corporations have come out and said more or less this, and they've said these issues as well. And so it's a very interesting thing. And so, and the trouble is right now, because we have a particularly xenophobic federal administration right now, that any reasonable reform in here to find a middling place is unlikely to take hold. And what I expect we'll see, apart from necessarily the lobbying that tech firms might be able to do, should they be able to, should they actually be able to engage the presidency in such a way where they can hold off on some of these visa restrictions. I think that the pendulum is in such a direction right now that people will kind of have such an adverse reaction to the H-1B program that they'll go against it. Now, we need some form of immigration control, and we can argue that one way or another, fundamentally for immigration, the stack of research that shows how good it is for a country to bring in skilled workers is very, very high. Now, we can argue about certain aspects of this and the legalization process and nature and what constitutes that, but that is the source, the engine of economic growth, particularly in areas like the Bay Area, which are economic centers. That they typically do offer a sizable portion of business, and dynamic economies have a large immigrant population. And I think the theory is not invalid. I think that workers and companies take advantage of that as they do other things. The offshoring problem is an interesting one, and companies have been doing that to varying levels. And the question is ultimately in this space, what can they reasonably get away with, and what will consumers demand? And we are a consumer-driven economy. It's about 2/3 of our GDP, our gross domestic product. And so that means that the decisions that consumers and businesses make in buying things have huge, huge implications on the results of company practices and behaviors. But do consumers care enough to put their money where their mouth is in those cases? And I would say, Probably not. Albert says, is there a situation where US government employees and private sector employees stagger their layoffs where we don't see an impact in the unemployment rate? Interesting. Hypothetically, I'm thinking we have enough folks drop off after 6 months they don't get counted and the U3 stays low and we never have a recession. I love that. Let's see. So could we have a situation where government employees and private sector employees stagger their layoffs to a point? One of the things that's really hard to do, if you've ever sat in front of a meeting with smart people, as you all have, because you all are smart people, because you're all here on a Thursday evening instead of partying, rocking and rolling, spending your 5 p.m. Get out of work time, dropping in, hanging out in I don't know, mission and doing whatever. This is a thing where you're actually here and trying to learn something about economics. I'm so grateful that you're present. But in this particular case, there isn't that level of coordination, I think, that's feasibly possible. Even when you provided one particular federal administration, they you provided you have like Trump and Elon, both people. If you look at an alignment chart, suffer both under the chaotic portion of an alignment chart. Both of them put together, you can't get that level of coordination even now. And so it would take a lot for that to happen. Now, that being said, I think and given that there's a lot of credibility in maintaining these numerical numbers, the data, the stuff that comes out of these things, that I don't think the numbers are cooked, so to speak. But it is possible that firms in best case situations or other things may choose at varying times to do certain things strategically in certain ways to generate positive outcomes for the firm. In accounting research, there's a huge subfield that focuses on earnings management, how companies behave in response to things like earnings calls. For instance, your end of your fiscal year is coming up. You want to show more profit than usual. You can play around with your accounts receivable and accounts payable, and there are legal ways that companies can do this. Likewise, if companies don't want to be on the bad end of a thing and announce a layoff, they won't if they don't have to and can maintain it with cash until they're looking for a more strategic time to do so. So I think at some level that type of management happens. Melanie says, we've got the 24-hour get out of work time these days. I know, 24-hour get out of work. It's like the 7-Elevens of work time. Congratulations. Ugh. So, monetary situation. Let's talk a little bit about this. So, one thing that's key and often a predictor of how the economy is moving or how the economy is behaving is the monetary supply. So, we talk a lot about the Fed, and one question is when is the Fed going to lower rates? When are the rates going to be lower? And why would we want the Fed to lower rates? Because that lowers the cost of doing business in the United States. It lowers the cost of investment. The Federal Reserve, and I always say this, I sound like a broken record, but we have a nice group of old people who've been here before and some newer folks. That the Fed controls one thing, overnight lending to big banks. They control a bunch of other things, but overnight lending to big banks is what we call the discount rate. That has a ripple effect. It affects all the other rates in our system. And so when the Fed is dealing with an inflationary environment, they raise rates really quickly to control inflation. And that's what they did 2 years ago. And what that has the effect, and it slows down the money supply. It keeps us it helps reduce inflation because it makes doing business so expensive. Nobody wants to do business because taking out money is more expensive. And then that has the effect of reducing the monetary supply. And then when they want the economy to go faster, to do better, to do more things, they lower the interest rate because that lowers the cost of capital, lowers the cost of doing business. And so it incentivizes firms to invest, build, do, hire, all those magical things. And the Fed has a dual mandate. They want full employment. And they also want around a 2% inflation rate. Right now, inflation's cooking at about 2.4, a little high. And so the Fed is still nervous about this. But look at how this affects monetary policy. Look at this chart at the bottom left. And this is the chart in blue shows the money supply growth, year-on-year growth rate, and the historical average growth rate of the money supply. So right in the beginning of COVID, we had that $5 trillion worth of stimulus spending all around the board to get us up and running to become the most rapidly recovering pandemic recession economy globally. 26.7% growth rate in money supply in 2020, 2021. Then the Fed steps in and says, uh-oh, we inflated ourselves. And then they raise rates really quickly. And then we saw this monetary This monetary growth falls sharply into a monetary retraction. This chart you can see by Charlie Bilello, Creative Planning. And then right now it stands at about 4.5%. Now that is still positive. The money supply is growing, but not fast enough for investment for many people because it's still below our historical average rate, which means that we're seeing the Fed under pressure to lower rates to incite greater monetary supply growth. But we're not so far off from where we should be. And the Fed cares about things like this. And that's why they are not in a rush to lower rates right now. Now, in other things, and what the rest of the world is doing, one of the interesting parts about the United States, you're like, why do we use the dollar? And why is the dollar so important? And why do people seem to care about the dollar? We know we have powerhouses like China out there. We've got powerhouses in the making like India happening. Why? What is the focus on the dollar? Why does it matter still? And this dates back to 1944. In 1944, the United States led an agreement known as the Bretton Woods Agreement, named for a hotel in northern New Hampshire, the Bretton Woods, and in the White Mountains, a very scenic place and a great place to drive your tortured family on an economics field trip. But it's in there in 1944, the U.S. assembled a bunch of worldwide allies, and it was quickly made known that the United States was the only country who was not suffering drastically in World War II in terms of the amount of the damage to its infrastructure. And so any post-war monetary agreement would inherently have to be based off the dollar. And they made the dollar the only currency convertible to gold, which was an amazing thing. We shut the doors, turned off the lights, freaked everybody out, and made them all sign this agreement. And it was fixed to the dollar at $35 per ounce of gold. And that was in 1944. And every country could hold dollars, but they couldn't convert their own currency to gold. Only the US could be converted to gold. And what did that mean? It meant that oil priced in dollars. It meant that commodities priced in dollars. Shenanigan, the stuff you put in your pockets, dollars. Stuff in your suitcase you sent to your relatives in Hungary, dollars. Everything else had to be dollars. And it's amazing. And so that's since the last 80 years, we've been chugging that magical adventure juice all the way up to our strength, and that has helped preserve the strength of our economy. But now, and every year the dollar's like, oh, it's the end of the dollar, the end of the dollar. No, it's not yet the end of the dollar. The US equity market's still about half of the global total market capitalization. We've got all these things that we still have some areas, some increasingly smaller areas of American exceptionalism in a very complex and diverse world. But one concern in the last few months is the volatility, leading to a flood of demand for treasury, people selling treasury notes, and a flood of international people from equity. And so looking at the net foreign purchases, actually looking at the numbers that we've seen so far, equity purchases from countries and foreign purchases of US equities have been still running at an amazingly solid level in 2024 and 2025. Back to your stock market question, people still view the US stock market as a way to make money. Treasury notes and bonds, there was some concern there for a while, but people are still funding the purchase of treasury notes and bonds. If foreign buyers said we don't want to buy any more US treasuries or bonds, that means the US would have to offer a higher interest rate on those bonds, and that would force our debt rates to going on in Colin country.
I'm so something that was mentioned earlier, which is by lowering rates, we make the cost of business
Hmm.
significantly cheaper. Um, why hasn't the Feds explored other avenues like introducing new subsidies instead?
Hmm. Good question. So this is the pressure. So this is a good point. So the Fed under pressure to reduce rates to stimulate the economy. They know the president wants Jerome Powell every other day. The president wants Jerome Powell to like be fired or be convicted for fraud or both things at times, depending on certain circumstances. And to Jerome Powell's credit, the stone-faced, steely Fed chair could give two frigs about what's happening in Trump's world. I mean, he does to a certain extent, but he's also been like, no, the Fed will do what the Fed will do, and that is what we will do. And his approach to this is actually what we would want from an independent Federal Reserve. Now, to your point, Colin, and that's a very interesting signal. So yes, the so the open mar the Federal so there's a couple of things at play. So we just got over a bubble from 2 years ago where the Fed engaged in a long number of series of what we call non-traditional monetary policy initiatives. The Fed was acquiring huge amounts of cash on their balance sheet, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, right? And it came to such a point, and it made a lot of sense during COVID. It helped stabilize markets, among other things, yada, yada, yada. And now they're in a point where they're delevering that. So the Fed balance sheet has been going down, 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 down a little bit for the last couple of years. I think the way that they would operate in their traditional framework in that sense, and the way they could stimulate the market or stimulate demand in the market would be to enter the market as a player and start buying stuff and messing things around and doing that kind of stuff. And they don't want to do this right now. They're concerned about doing this. They don't want to create market initiatives. They're worried about being blamed for a market crash that might come in. And further, even signaling that they're doing something like that provides onus that they're being pendant nature that Jerome Powell wants to still convey that the Fed has. And so I think he's doing it. I think he could, but he won't.
Okay. But okay. I'm just
But why
I'm just
doesn't
curious
he?
because it
Why
feels
not?
like the government is it's very obvious to us that President Trump and much of Congress wants to lower rates to incentivize business spending and investment, and yet they continuously go back to Powell. Yet, subsidies just happen to be the first thing on my mind, but I'm sure they can do other things like tax write-offs or tax incentives
Yes.
or other
Oh,
like
well,
targeted tariffs. I don't want to say blanket tariffs the way they've been doing that, but targeted tariffs can also do. So it feels like there's so many valves they're not exploring. And is there a historical reason why, or
that why the Fed's not doing it, you mean? Why the Fed
yeah,
isn't?
that they're not exploring all the other valves that, from my point of view, they have
That's a good
access to.
question. So, Colin, I think if I were even to simplify it more, I think the Fed's still worried about inflation, frankly.
Right? So okay, so they are worried about inflation, but if they're
They are.
worried about inflation, then they shouldn't be telling Jerome Powell to
Oh,
do
no, no,
anything.
no. No, Jerome Powell and the Fed are worried about inflation. That's why they're
Oh,
not going to do
oh,
anything.
I'm talking
But
about
the
the
government as a
federal.
whole, so why isn't the
Yeah,
government doing, I see, I'm sorry. I
yeah,
misunderstood. I'm like, why isn't
yeah,
the
yeah.
Fed doing things? I see, I'm sorry. It's why isn't the
Not the
government
reserve.
actually doing stuff that they can do all these things? Now,
Yeah.
this is a very interesting play. So I was actually thinking about this, like at the beginning of the Trump tariffs and trying to think about this and saying, why we have so much economic proof that this only, if anything, in the very least, it negatively affects your economy a little bit, or it could negatively affect your economy a lot. So this is also an interesting play. So I think so. The strategy here, and at least economists that the president is listening to or using in that context, they're advocating what they're doing for their stimulus package, Colin, is that is the tax cuts and reduced taxes in the big beautiful bill situation, right? That is their stimulation package for them because that is what they believe will stimulate the economy. So that's what we got. I mean,
But given the current rise
right.
in the stock market, is the economy requiring stimulation? This is a weird
Well, what
question
is the
to ask.
economy? What is the economy? Let's sit on top of the mountain. What is the economy? Let's say,
Like, does the economy like
let's
how
sit
do
on.
economists real think like how do what metrics do economists use to measure to
Hmm.
say the economy is currently requiring stimulation? I think
Yes.
that's a better question.
Good question. That is, you'll get an answer that's different from everybody, but so it depends. So you want to get it before it turns negative. That's the downside. But you look for strongly negative economic sentiment in some ways. Broken markets, trade, confidence in banks drops. There's a million reasons why we would, right? In the pandemic, it was a mass amount of layoffs. That was the signal. So economists look for certain signals to initiate these stimuli. Now, for the federal government to initiate stimuli, we're nowhere near that yet, right? Because we've got a 4.1% unemployment rate. For official numbers speaking, we're all exhausted, but the federal government's like, they don't need stimulus right now on this. I'm actually very curious, Colin, and this is a question. This administration, the way they would structure this, so we had this impression that in 2008, I think the economic consensus was President Obama didn't do enough. He did a lot, but didn't do enough to get us out of that Great Recession. So you had this very, very long, long, long period where we were recovering. And COVID-19 happened. Everybody took that to heart, and people were like, stimulus, 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 trillions of dollars of stimulus into there. Boom, ha ha. Then we had inflation. And now I think the pendulum would swing the other way. So if we had bad news tomorrow, if we had a slew of layoffs, let's say and even then that continued for a month or 2 months, I would expect we're going to vacillate back to a president and Congress who'll be more reticent on issuing any meaningful economic stimuli until such a point as I think we would hesitate. I think the infrastructure in place and the way that I'm looking and reading on what people are thinking about this right now, the inflationary pushback is so severe in the way of our thinking that there is a hesitation on engaging meaningful stimuli, even if that was the case. So, yes. So, what do we got to look for? We would have to look for a catastrophe. We would have to look for hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of job losses. And I think we'd get a stimulus, and I think it would be disappointing. That's a concern. But then I think we would learn from our first bad stimulus, and then we'd eventually the pendulum would get back on track again. But it would. But I'm actually very not optimistic about our ability to respond to it if it was catastrophic. I think we could respond to a regular old recession that was kind of like we dip in the negative territory for a couple of months and then we're out of it. I don't know. What do you think will happen? Give me what's your take?
I am not as I don't have a pulse on the economy like you do. I just think
No, everyone. I don't have. I have a pulse.
it,
I'm a pulse, but I'm barely a doctor. It's like a.
yeah, but like, well, I'm talking about the
Is a
economic
pulse.
pulse, but
I feel it.
it's just it feels like so my answer is usually the what people call socialism and just it boggles my mind to see the distribution of wealth
Yeah, yeah.
uh, being so lopsided and
Hmm.
understanding that if everyone benefits from America as a society, then those who benefit the most should then continue to maybe pay it forward by investing back in
Ooh,
the structures that made their abundance and wealth possible. Yeah.
to your point, Colin, and I want to give you a supportive point. So this is a chart that shows how people spend their money and the crisis of as we get older, right? So the age at which you are, right, you're paying in a lot of money. What you pay in is the orange, and when you pay in more than you get, that's where you are. So from the age of 18 till you're 64, you're given more than you're getting when it comes to the amount of taxes that's out there, right? In terms of entitlements. And these might be things like Social Security, healthcare, other benefits we're talking about. And then when you hit that magical retirement age, it's all coming up sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. And this is used mainly to discuss primarily our demographic transition into being an older society. But the hard part we have to figure out ultimately to answer this question, and nothing that you said is incorrect. We have a slew of economic research that shows, for instance, high wealth disparities are associated with a large number of economic problems and issues. But at the same time, in a redistributive framework, it's very hard. We have to somehow shift the axis in such a way that we can sustain a significantly older population in the next 50 years. And that's a question.
That can be I think that my point of view is just there is enough wealth.
Hmm.
We do not need to inject more wealth. There is enough wealth.
Gotta move it
We
around,
don't need
right?
to inject more wealth. There's a problem with how that
How do
wealth
you
is
do it?
distributed, right?
Yeah.
If there's 30 cookies and 10 people, but 25
Hmm.
of those cookies are held by one person,
Right,
one would
right,
say that that
right.
one person should probably be okay with having 10 cookies instead of 25.
But
But apparently, this is not a very popular point of view.
it's actually what you're expressing is actually technically the majority opinion of the country, if you poll them, is that people who are wealthier should be taxed more. And indeed, that is fundamental to this. But interestingly, it is not, and I'm not agreeing, I'm not a policy. I'm just so I want to say that the essence of what you're saying is right. I agree with that that more wealth should pay more to a society. But the problem is the bill that we just passed, we are fighting over this right now, and it's fascinating. And there is a situation right now, especially when we look at the bill that just came out, where it is doing the opposite of what you would think they would do. So that
Yeah,
I try so hard to
it's tough. It's I
to
mean,
be neutral.
even without looking at just,
Uh,
resources itself, I'm and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm sure there's enough jobs to go for every American. Um,
That's a good question. There is, but this is the hard part too. And so we have a lot of unanswered questions about this, right? So think of the questions of what you would think would be a human right. It could be things like healthcare, it could be things like this, and it could be things that would be, that would be rational for society to pay for. And then there's the question of jobs itself. Are jobs worth doing? Are there other programs that we could have that develop and train people into jobs? And that's certainly the focus, right? So actually this has been a fun week for me. This week I got to advise. I was called up very quickly on very short notice to advise one of our sitting U.S. senators on the housing bill that he's proposing. And we've got two senators, and they're cool. They're both decent guys. Here in New Mexico, we always have two senators, but they're both Democrats. They're both very smart people with different ideas and different things in mind. And so they're trying to determine externalities and different issues. And so we're trying to create outcomes in things like housing that are often very tricky and often, oh God, it's so politically challenging,
it
Colin,
is.
to get buy-in for these things. So even if you come out with something that's like, oh, here's this bill in this, and they are trying to determine for me, and one of the things we're going to talk about CEQA here tonight as well, is even when you come up with very good, thoughtful legislation that's designed to do a good thing, the outcomes may be vastly different. And so then determining those things and trying to figure out and anticipate those outcomes becomes important. And sometimes we don't truly know the outcomes till they actually happen. And then the academics will write about it 20 years later and say it was obvious that it would create these problems. And then, but really it's never that obvious. Oh, man.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh,
Hindsight 2020, but a system is what it does.
right.
A system is what it does, and I'm sure
Yeah.
there's quite enough people that would agree that the current system and
Oh,
what it
no.
does is not
Right.
in the interest of the vast majority.
Right. I want to get back to Marsha's question too, because Marsha dropped offline. Ah, darn it. Well,
Oh,
Marsha, if you're out there in internet space, I think that's a good one. It's a result of being able to print our own money and at the federal level, if elected, how could Mandami pay for his campaign promises in New York City? That's a very interesting question. It's a very interesting question to look at this. I think, you know, the fun part about this, and to Colin's point on this too, is what I would say. And I know Marsha's not here, so I'm talking to I'm talking to the rest of you. But I hope you didn't leave out of frustration for me not answering your question. But to Colin, to your point right here, I think it's worth trying, and this is a good point, right? So you have this mayor named Mamdani who's like, and people are like, how will he pay for these things? Well, let's think of legislation that will attack the problem with the best people that we have, engage it from different circles, send it around the policy block, judge, and everything has externalities, right? Everything has unintended consequences, and there's no such thing as something that doesn't have consequences to it, which need to be addressed. And the hard part about leadership is evaluating which consequences do you think will be most meaningful and positive against those which will be negative in some ways. And then you have to evaluate them in the sense, and that's why we elect leaders to make those judgments and hopefully sensible leaders who provide those contexts within it. And so to get there and to design policies in this space, it's messy and it's terrible, but it's worth attempting. And that's what I try. So I don't have an answer specifically, but I think it's worth attempting. And one critique I do have of his policies, I think his housing policy it needs to be much more vast. I know he's looking at different things. Rent controls and things are never really good economic policy, but increasing supply is good economic policy. So I think he's been he didn't say he wasn't going to do that. So it's interesting to see how that's going to pan out. So this is the thing. So Colin, that's exactly we want the Collins of the world to sit and wonder and be like, here's the thing, back to the engagement question. I got to keep the Collins engaged into this question because you look at everything right now and you're like, oh, this is terrible. And everyone's going everyone is doing the morally opposite of what I want them to do. What do I do? Well, then you have to keep trying. And that's the hard part. And keep working on it because the pendulum does shift, and that's the thing, right? And so I don't know if any of you follow Matt Iglesias and other things. He's an interesting guy, but he came out with this thing. He's already talking about how tax policies will need to be changed in a more progressive mode, once the next election happens. Because even when you have a presidency like this one and it goes this way, then it goes the other way, and then you get more progressive infrastructure. So the key is when it's your time to write the laws that they become the good ones. So, Melanie, Those who make the gold make the rules, says Michael. And Melanie says an easy fix would be to enlarge the orange portion of the graph, make it possible for older workers to continue paying in. You're right, though. That's so fun. We just gotta move that in a little bit. Just move it to the right. But then it moves too far right, and nobody retires. Here's your mandated 1 year of retirement. Good luck. And then Logan's run it when people hit 80 years old or something. I don't know. Does anybody understand that reference? Anyway, that's the thing. Anyway, so I'm a million years old. I last saw a movie in 1977. So the single most important problem. This is interesting, actually. So speaking of, you ask the National Federation of Independent Business. You ask business people what their problem is. This is what they tell you. So we've got four choices. Is it inflation? Is it taxes? Is it the quality of labor? Kids don't work these days. No. Is it the cost or availability of insurance? And for the last 4 years, it's been inflation, inflation, inflation. But now the tables have turned. And now we've got people, inflation, not a big deal, they say. It's cost of insurance coming up in fourth place. It's inflation still third. And then surprising everybody in the number one spot, it's taxes again, which is interesting. So back to Colin's point, we're now into a situation where now the biggest obstacle to business success is now taxes.
Oh my God.
I'm not
I
out
don't
to
think
discourage you
I just don't
intentionally.
think we taxes is also like we could have a whole discussion and podcast on this, but my
Should.
current stance is taxes are fine as long as you get good quality service out of the taxes. Because other countries can do it, but our country just can't.
That's right. Other countries can do it. We can't. This is interesting. We have an interesting country in the United States. This is a fun place to be. We're like, good luck if you're down. There's this thing where, like, remember that news article that was going around, the memes about how American tourists, when they're pickpocketed in Europe, they like beat up the pickpocketer and it shocks Europeans. And people are like, this is the United States where everything that we own, we have to like crawl and hover over and fight over like scraps at the table. And it was a very interesting perspective, though, that we have this way. Whereas if you're somebody in Europe, you're pickpocketed, you're like, oh, there's other things. I'm not going to go broke or die on the streets tomorrow. But in the United States, we're really never sure, are we? Like tomorrow, I'm like, oh, here's Reilly White, professor of finance. Tomorrow, I could be Reilly White, sleeping under a bridge somewhere. And I've been there before, and it's been a journey, and it's terrible. And we always have that fear, and that is such a thing that we have to deal with, Colin. If only there was a society we could create that wasn't that way.
Oh my God.
That's Colin's homework. We'll have it. Mokenomics.
They exist. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure if I looked at Germany or Singapore or maybe even Japan, those societies exist. But we'll see.
Japan has more affordable real estate, though.
I feel like Japan has the right idea when it comes to how they approach real estate. Real estate is a depreciating asset, which makes a lot of sense to me because
Oh, sorry.
it's not, unless you buy a house new, it's used. And since when does used goods become more expensive over time?
Yes, exactly right. We're trying to create a bill to incentivize home building, and that's tricky too. Because then you have a whole bunch of things. Because one of the things we talk about when you have this thing, right, and you have this point about, you make a good point about real estate in that sense. But when you look at something like increasing real estate supply, it's not as simple as merely like I argue on certain factors that are important. Like zoning is really important. It's very restrictive, and we need to improve zoning so that all of the Bay Area doesn't look like Millbrae and it's all single family homes as far as the eye can see, even though you have demand for other things. But it's also cost of construction and permitting and the availability of labor and a whole bunch of stuff, CEQA lawsuits in this case. And so all of these things become part of this. And there are so many obstacles at place that you dig deeper and it becomes an onion of why we can't do something, we can't build something, and we can't create something. Vikram says, don't the reasons for these lie outside the realm of economics? Oh, Vikram, that's such a great question. I would actually argue that it's all economics, all the way down, because economics is the way, it's the future, it's the now, it's how things work. And yes, even though we can argue that economic forms in different systems, it is the trading, the being of human people and human activity. And as long as humans are activity and humans move resources from one place to another, even if it is intellectual, economics will be there. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so around the right side, you've got an interesting take as well as the amount of hours people are working. In the pandemic, it shot up because we fired a bunch of workers and made everybody else work harder. And then since then, the hours are coming down slightly. And some of this is due to employers scheduling less hours and people having less hours to work. But we're down to 34 hours, not a sign necessarily of a strong economic situation. Now, Vikram, as a shout out to you because I love that you ask this question. I know you've been here for it. I know you've been hanging around, so we get some answers to this one. So Vikram brought this up for me, and I know everyone has been, all the Californians in the neighborhood. I've been looking at the news coming out about AB 130, Senate Bill 130, 131, right? Looking at the CEQA related reforms. I also want to do this. This is a book that's been floating around for some time. Read this book. This is more or less the economic thesis. This is not really, I mean, it's super easy to read. It's like 220 pages. Read it on your next coast to coast flight. It's super easy. You'll breeze through it. But it's kind of the way of thinking into these things because you have the choice of viewing economics as a source of scarcity or viewing as one where we have to seek out abundance. And this book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson talks about abundance, but they go over a whole bunch of very interesting California related cases that I think are worth talking about. And while it's obviously it's I mean, you can only do so much in 220 pages, right? You can do like, you have to limit certain elements. It's not an academic argument. It's written so that people can understand the fundamental barriers at play of this situation. But the interesting part is one of the things that focuses on this question of outcomes. And I'm very much an outcomes guy, so I'm very focused on creating sometimes legislation creates bad economic outcomes. And CEQA was passed for all the right reasons in 1970, back when Governor Ronald Reagan of California in 1970 passed that legislation. And it's coming off of a period, 1969, we had the Cuyahoga River caught fire in Cleveland, and people were shocked that the United States had devolved into such poor environmental status. And so they created CEQA as a methodology, as a way, as a bill that would force developments to consider the environmental impact of their building and to counter environmental degradation. A very, at the time, perhaps necessary and valued bill. But we all know the story of what happened with that, right? So what happened when you invoked this legislation is it opened a number of loopholes where any development, any building project, anything else could be opposed for environmental reasons and delayed, even through lawsuits or anything else. And lawsuits affected over 50% of all building projects in California in the last 2 decades. And 4 out of the 5 lawsuits targeted building dense housing in urban areas, which we call infill development in economics. Now, infill development, building an increasing zone, so building, say, a multi-story housing structure where there was a single family home, was used by different people to oppose building anything in these areas. And that contributed greatly to the housing crisis that California is in today, frankly and directly. And I'm not going to even mince my words here, that although the legislation was good, environment, good. Preservation, good. Yes. The outcomes of it, lawsuits for building anything, delaying it, delaying is cost. Nothing got built. And as a consequence, you got these shenanigans. So even when California reformed zoning, we couldn't do anything about it because of CEQA and all the lawsuits that were created. And so Vikram asked me, he's like, how long before Senate Bill 131 and 130 produce actual results that improve California's situation? So I thought through this problem, and this is my best guess. So they're in effect when Governor Newsom signed them as of June 30th, 2025. Now, these statutory exemptions apply now to eligible infill housing, childcare centers, and more, right? So projects currently in the pipeline may qualify retroactively. So clap, la da 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 da. So far, so good. In 6 to 12 months from now-ish, we should see some short-term acceleration in this. We should see this reduce litigation risk via the elimination of these unusual circumstances loophole, streamline reviews for things like near-miss projects, and I think this 30-day decision deadline under Senate Bill 131 is going to begin to speed these permitting cycles, which is its own head in the multi-headed why we can't build in California hydra, or actually anywhere in the United States. And the medium-term effects on this, and we're talking about maybe late 2026, probably 2027, we start seeing real meaningful increases in urban infill housing starts. That is actually a good thing. You're like, urban infill, does that mean more traffic and things? It means more housing, and we got to increase the supply. And I know I'm having a hypothetical. You guys are very polite in the chat window. Maybe you're just seething with rage because you disagree with all of these reforms, and you're like, I want my single family mansion in Atherton to remain to myself. And I just logged on to Albert's list because I want to see what the peasants are doing these days and why they're passionate. But the medium-term effects, we're going to see conversion of stalled projects, for instance, vacant shopping centers. I think you'll see more of that happening, finally breaking ground. I think you'll see broader build-out of social infrastructure, farm worker housing clinics, broadband, stuff that's tough to get built right now. And then the long-term vision, this is the goal of this thing in 2028 plus. Atherton gets so boring. Yes, the Archerton more like it. So I look on Zoom. Thanks, Melly. I knew you were one of them. Potential cost stabilization in dense housing markets would be the goal. Stabilization being the number, right? Listen to me on this one. It's not going to, and I gotta reiterate this. It's not gonna individually, even doing all of this and looking at the speed of building, unless I can snap my fingers and double the housing supply in the Bay Area overnight. It's not going to reduce the numbers very quickly, but it will pause them and halt the growth of them. And then time will pass and incomes will catch up. And it's a model for reform in other states with CEQA-like laws. I live in a very prohibitive area myself, New Mexico in many cases. Here in Santa Fe, where I live, we have tons of Californians, among other people, who are very kind and loving neighbors, and they're very fun and la la la. But we have the same sort of zoning restrictions issues, housing restrictions, very limited market. So even if you're in a town like this in a very poor state, we have obnoxiously high for New Mexico prices, the average price of a home here. Well, a piece of cake by California standards at like $650,000 a pop, actually 700,000. We're above 700,000 now. Is still like in a state as poor as New Mexico, where our median household income in Santa Fe is 70,000, a untenable situation to be in. And so this law could be affect a lot of other things. It's a shift in political climate. You want development framed as actually environmentally friendly, because infill housing is better for the environment than putting a whole bunch of single family homes on open land. Keep the open land, build denser. That's what we're saying. And equity imperative too, in that sense of providing we call the mid-market of lost homes. So Vikram, this is my best bet and how it will go. And it's sobering because it's not going to change things overnight, but we should see this. There's a lot of things at play. There's a lot of issues why you can't build something quickly. But here's the deal, right? You had very smart people working on this. You had a hard state to work on this on. You had every possible interest group fight this and not fight this, and also for this. And it makes me so optimistic that you got this past California, A plus. So you're trying to do something. Good work. Pat yourselves on the back
Nice.
until you, yeah, I know, while you still hover for share an apartment with 15 other people who are also computer engineers and trying to afford this. I just
Oh man.
have one of your roommates pat yourself on the back. It's so hard, but it has to change. Because that's the key. And if you do this, now here's the thing, if you can stabilize these prices and make it livable, you've built the foundation of the next boom cycle in the Bay Area too. That will keep going. Colin, what's your take? Mm.
I mean,
Oh yeah. High speed rail. Agreed, Vikram. Yeah.
okay, so this has come up given that I am currently not a homeowner. And
Would you like to be, Colin?
one of the weirdest things in life is realizing that somehow owning a home became
Yeah.
like this major life achievement, yet back in like the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't like a significantly difficult step.
Mm.
And there's a whole slew of things to discuss in that aspect. But when I was digging into it, and we've discussed this topic several times before, multiple and always what came up was there's just no supply. But also, uh, there's a lot of housing being built out in, I guess, smaller towns and villages or whatever, where the houses can go on the market for like 200K.
Right.
And obviously, the reason why those are not taken is partly because of the jobs and also partly because of infrastructure. Um, Most engineers who have full-time remote work can easily work from one of those places, but maybe they don't want to for other reasons, like maybe it's not just well developed enough. But I just think there's so much going on and at different uh stratospheres. You can have the supply level
Yeah.
or you can infrastructure level. Like if, for example, I were to live in somewhere that was not that great, but I had the public infrastructure, public railways to get to where I wanted as fast as I needed to be, and that was significantly easier. I'm sure that would increase the attraction of these places and make those giant supply houses. So it's like there was a study, I think, where there is definitely enough houses for every American, but it's just unfortunate that those houses are all located in the wrong place. So maybe it's just we need to increase the possibility of transport and distribution when it comes to helping that happen. But there's multiple
Oh,
different
I
ways
can
to
see
get.
it already. There's a newspaper. Colin towns are built all over Iowa and the upper Midwest.
I don't even
And
want
suddenly,
more towns. I just want more ways to
Colinburg.
reach
It's going to be a
places.
place to ship people, and it's this thing, and it's going to be all these sad propaganda of people being forced on in cars and trains to live in Colin's planned cities with no jobs. No, I'm just kidding, Colin. I'm just kidding.
I,
But you're not wrong.
I
But
feel
human
like
behavior is fascinating, though, isn't it? Because we
yeah,
cluster
consumer
in
behavior
areas of
is
economic
fascinating.
activity. Yeah, right.
Government, like I'm not a policy person or an economics person, but if I were to like asked to pitch something, I would say, why doesn't the government just
Yeah.
incentivize companies to make their HQs at like these remote places, which will instantly add
Improve it,
jobs,
right?
add 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 jobs, add
Yeah.
population, add maybe infrastructure, all that stuff. And like I feel like that's a one way you can
Right.
kickstart the process.
A fair question, Colin, but you know why they do it. That's the same reason why the Bay Area is a tech hub, right? Why are so many tech companies located here? Why are there 70 some Fortune 500 companies, just Fortune 1000 companies in the Bay Area? Why is it so concentrated right here, driving up land costs? I like this point, Colin. That's like New Mexico thing. You're like, there's a company here. Let's get rid of it. It made us expensive. Then suddenly people are like, but your point is valid. Your point is valid. I want to give you credit on this. I promise you. I promise you this is good. So the thing is, and this is the thing that we have, we find that entities cluster together, and some economists have studied this over time and have found that entities that cluster together outperform those who are clustered individually. And so going back to the status of an individual worker, if you're a worker living in Alabama and you move to a rural place and you move to a city, just by virtue of competition, cycles, engagement with other people, your productivity becomes 50% higher than working in a rural area. Now, the life is not merely about rural is not life is not about achieving an economic growth number or achieving that level of this or spending your day working and toiling in a mine at maximum productivity for pat on the back when you retire at the age of 70 and good luck on your retirement. So I want to acknowledge that's a bogus way and one-dimensional way to look at life. But the trick is that there is productivity gains that are gained by clustering, and that's why people do so. And that's the hard part. And that's been befuddling, right? Because a couple years back, it was suggested that Washington, for instance, DC, could decentralize the central government very easily. We don't need all of those government institutions in one area driving up the prices in the DC area, which are pretty high. You can imagine that putting the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Defense in Minnesota and the Department of Homeland Security in Oregon or somewhere else would improve this. But they found that by sharing workers, they share expertise, productivity, and improvement. And so there is this clustering mechanism, these nodes that we have to abide by, which is why my focus has been on is let's build up and make things happen, which is also offensive to people who like views of the bay, like behind you.
Yes, and I agree 90% with what you said. The
Ooh,
10% I disagree is, and I can only speak for tech because that's been most of my experience, is tech does
mhm,
not have that restriction. Tech
right.
talent, like,
Mhm.
which is offshoring a lot to
Right.
India and Vietnam and other areas, tech does not have that restriction because tech doesn't honestly
Mm.
require a lot of their workers to go to any location. So they can be clustered, but in the internet. They don't have to be physically clustered. You can still be clustered
Internet
mentally.
clustered. You're
Yeah,
right.
internet
You're
and
right.
mental clusters
Right.
exist. You just don't have to be physically clustered. And if the tech se
Mm.
in my mind, maybe I'm just like not seeing this from the top, like the viewpoint from those at the top. Like if you can get engineers and say, hey, we're gonna allow you to remote from anywhere in the world, and we're gonna
Hmm.
your salary is gonna go way farther. The total number can be decreased by like 20%, but your total cost of living cost will decrease by 50%. That's a significant change in
Exactly.
calculus of living.
And
And
that's
I'm
why so many
thinking,
people left, though, too, right?
yeah,
That's
that's why so
exactly
many people
right.
left, and
Yeah.
that's why I get to function. I always negotiate for full-time remote work, and I turn my salary, which is pennies in the Bay Area, to maximal value because I spend several months of the year working from Taiwan, which is a
Ah,
significantly cheaper cost of
it
living,
is.
right?
I was
And
impressed at Taiwan's cheapness. It was very
yeah,
fun, but like
Taiwan is
very
Asia's
affordable.
very cheap. The
Yeah.
company gets the same amount of work. There's definitely a lot of
Yeah.
studies saying that some workers produce more value remote work. Like every time I drive to the office, I just think I spend 2 hours of my 1 to 2 hours of my day driving, and I'm
Yeah.
not producing value for anybody while I'm driving. But if I wake up, roll out of bed, drink my coffee, and then get on my computer and start producing value, that's like time saved, that's more efficient, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
You're right, though, Colin. That's absolutely
I'm just
right.
saying, like, I don't have to be
Yeah.
clustered here to be effective.
Yeah.
And I think the tech industry, at least, I'm sure I am well aware the tech industry is not indicative of the whole economy. But if the government maybe says, hey, tech companies,
Right.
you know, we want to incentivize you to allow your workers to work from all these other places, why not? I
I
participate in webinars.
I think I think you're onto something because Colin, I think what's going to happen is generationally, I think the concept of remote work and this doing this well, although we've had this pendulum go from everybody remote to everybody back to work, and I think right now generationally people like you, so I've taken the position even in my role. I'm like, look, my issue with companies is that if you have an issue with remote work, you're not measuring this correctly. I'm like, what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? And they'll
Yeah,
say, oh, it's culture and bringing people together and all these things, and I'm like, look, are they getting the work done you're asking them to do? And they almost inevitably say in every case, yes, of course, they're getting the work done, but, and there's a lot of other things to this too. This is a big, but Colin, I think what's going to happen is we'll have research on this too that redefines what clustering is it effective as the other space. So I love it. I want to get to Claire's question too. Is there any chance Prop 13 will be overturned? That's a very interesting one. So Prop 13, landmark piece, California tax law passed, I think back in 1978-ish or 70 something. And so it fundamentally dictated how property taxes were calculated. It basically fixed property tax growth to what is it, like 1% of property value, and then it limited increases to 2% per year. So I think you could use clarity or answer on this. The same formulas, the same coalitions that were involved to pass the CEQA improvements. And so this is actually an interesting debate. And so looking at this, it is true that that when you have a bill like Prop 13, it really benefits these long-term homeowners who pay very little property taxes on, relatively speaking, on very, very expensive homes because of these assessment rules. And so that only gets fixed when the property is sold and it gets reassessed at a new value. And so if you've had a home for 30 or 40 years, you'll have an artificially low property tax rate. And so I see that as being something that, although I'm not aware, is this cooking right now somewhere? But I'm not aware of it, but it should be on the docket, particularly as California looks at revenue concerns, cities and towns look at revenue concerns. And so I think it's going to be a big part of this in the future. I think it's going to be a big deal. So, it's going to be a thing. So, I had another question that came in my docket today, and this is the same slide I showed last time. And they're like, "Hey, what's going to happen to California farm workers with undocumented immigrants?" And I know this is the slide that I was there last month, but if you're here last month, then act surprised. But one thing that is here, and I'm using some data from the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. About a third of the Bay Area are immigrants, and about 6% of the population of the Bay Area are undocumented immigrants. And if you go into the San Joaquin Valley, it's about 5%. Using the San Joaquin perhaps as an example of an area that's agricultural heavy, that you've got a lot of itinerant workers and a sizable number of people who are undocumented, what kind of economic effects will this have? And limiting this to the industry, undocumented immigrant labor is 16% of the construction industry in California, 14% of agriculture and forestry. So it's about one-sixth of the economic impact. And so what happens is if you get rid of all those workers, then there's a question of who does all of these labor intensive tasks. It is very hard to find people to do those labor intensive tasks who are not undocumented immigrants for the amount people are willing to pay. And so you've got to raise wages to find people. There's a fair price for everything. And so you got to raise wages to pay it. So if you want stuff picked, then that does mean higher prices at your table down the line as well. And that's something interesting. Also, more interestingly, is that firms that employ, even though firms, this is interesting. So you can choose to not, one of the things, it's a fascinating artifact of our policies that you can always have firms have a lot of plausible deniability with hiring undocumented workers, even though, of course, through the normal hiring process, they aren't allowed to, but they have to pay taxes if they do or somehow do or can argue that, oh, these workers are there, they still have to pay taxes for those workers. And so getting rid of all those undocumented workers is like a $70 billion aggregate hit to the California economy in terms of 10 billion in state and local taxes, federal taxes of 12 billion, about 47 billion in spending power. And here in New Mexico, about 50% of our undocumented immigrants are actually homeowners too. And so that's a huge piece of this. And so it's a huge part of the economy. Most people disregard them or view them as less than, and they're real hard workers and they're real people out there that are working these areas and places where we can't find other people to do this labor. And it's very hard to imagine, you won't find college students, you won't find people out there who have that ability or even skill to do some of this very, very, very hard and laborious picking. So some firms will seek automation, some agricultural firms will raise prices, but either one of those things will create price effects that will negatively affect things. And another question that said, is the Fed going to lower rates? And here's where we are today. This is a little piece that Reventure Consulting puts down, but they use something called the CMA FedWatch tool, which is what, it's reasonably fashionable. So right now, looking at the FedWatch tool, we've got this like gradual decline. I know it looks steep because we're looking at a 17-year period, but starting right now with rates between 4.25 and 4.5%, they anticipate the Fed will cut slowly through the end of 2026, so that by June of next year, we could have rates that are about a percent lower. That implies 4 to 5 rate cuts by then. We'll see if that's accurate or not. And that's a good question. So if we get more inflation in the next 6 months, don't expect these will happen. Jerome Powell will halt the cuts and might even reverse trend. If inflation remains low, expect the cuts to come. And I think 3 or 4 might be reasonable. Now, on the other side of this, we had a question about the big, beautiful bill, specifically around healthcare and rural healthcare in particular. So I appreciate the nuance of that question. So the One Big Beautiful Bill Act makes about $1.2 trillion in cuts to Medicaid in our CARE Act subsidies over the next decade, which affects about 11 to 17 million people who could lose coverage, particularly hitting low income in rural communities. Why do we care about rural communities so much? Because right now the medical situation in rural communities is particularly acute. I'm working with our health sciences center in the next 3 months. I've got a PhD student working with me on a project on trying to turn some of these initiatives our health science center is doing at University of New Mexico in the rural space into economic effects that convert basically, oh, we to help these many people, we put a dollar value on that because that's how people talk about people. Ah, we saved lives. That's worth $4 million. But then it looks really good in grants, and that's what we're trying to increase. So we're trying to increase funding for rural health in New Mexico. We have a terrible dearth of hospitals in these areas. And about 300 rural hospitals have already announced closures in recent years. 700 more are at risk nationwide due to funding reductions, and they rely heavily on Medicaid disbursements, making them extremely vulnerable to this type of legislation. So, anticipating this, and Colin already, he's on it. Colin's on it. I love it. That's so snarkily wonderful. So, what did they do? What did they throw in there for rural health care? $50 billion. So here's 1.2 trillion in cuts. But here's $50 billion for you to for states to apply to. They have to apply by the end of the year, in fact, by 2025, and how they would use that money. But it's a fund that states can apply to improve their health care. And this is a fascinating thing. As one expert put it, it's a fig leaf on what is really an atrocious statue of our current medical situation. And what does this mean? How many people are going to be uninsured because of this? You know, looking up in California and the West Coast in particular, right across the board, there's 4% plus of the population of the West Coast and California that are going to be losing health coverage. In New Mexico, too, highly affecting us. But
That's like a 97% cut.
here's 50 billion. Here you go. Ah, what a world. This is
MAGA math.
Vikram, how do we put a number on a misery that will be caused? There's a whole bunch of economists that we love putting numbers on misery. Hold on, I turned my video camera off by accident. There it is. So yes, so there's nothing we like doing. So it's a really good question. This is the hardest part, right? And so how do you tackle this? And I hate to say, Vikram, that it's often a very clinical process, but a very mathematical process. But we can quantify the negative effects on life expectancies, on health outcomes, on educational outcomes, all of which are tremendously, tremendously great. And so it's less, for instance, we're increasing people who lack the ability to work because they can't achieve medical care. That's a financial impact. They have a lower quality of life, a financial impact that affects regions in that sense. The purpose of a system is what it does.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's not good, and it will have negative effects overall, and nothing about $50 billion unless you change that to the 1.2 trillion that they're cutting is going to actually make this better. So that's the hard part. That's a very nice symbolic gesture. It's like, thank you. Here's uh,
We have 12 minutes left, so I don't want
oh,
to be.
yep, let's rock and roll.
Yeah,
Albert says, will the
so
private sector find a way? Ah, at a price, maybe.
at a price. The problem is the private sector is held back by insurance. If anyone ever wants to do a deep dive into the twin beasts of healthcare and insurance, you will end up hating private insurance. I'm going to jump to the conclusion, and I would be unbelievably surprised if anyone who understands the whole process comes to a different conclusion. But healthcare absolutely wants to help you, and they're held back by insurance. That is like 99% of the problem.
You're
Anyways.
not wrong.
I mean, I looked into this, spent some time reading about it, doing the research, and I was like, oh, so it's literally all insurance trying to make a profit off the misery. And the answer was that's basically what it boiled down to.
Yep, misery profits. That's a
Misery
great.
profits. If you want to put a number on misery, Vikram, just look at insurance's profits.
True.
That is the number.
So, real quick, let me wrap some things up for you guys. And we got another topic we'll talk about next time. I'm going to kick some things down the line for next month. But right now, housing sentiment is bad. We have increased inventories of people willing to sell their homes and increased amounts of people who are actually filing mortgage applications. But the sentiment remains terrible. But one thing is, and this is interesting as well, apartment rents are going down in Austin, Texas. This is a good thing. A consequence of building lots of different structures is you can actually make prices go down, and that's what's happening in Austin. The problem with Austin is that they're in a fascinating political debate with some of their council members about The reaction that Austinites have taken from this is that, oh, there's too much development. As a consequence, we should restrict development now. So the pendulum might swing the other way too. Humanity is a magnificent cycle. Right now, mortgage applications are still higher than before, but overall, we are still in a position where we're not doing particularly well. Now, mortgage delinquency rates right now across the country are climbing, generally speaking, across the board. These are absolute numbers. So 0.1%, 0.2%, not huge numbers, but not insignificant in delinquency status. That is a sign that people are deteriorating in their credit quality, but we're nowhere near where we were back to the pre-2008 financial crisis. But things are continuing in most states, to decline. Now, where do people buy a home? There's many sources where they get for down payments. For most people, it is savings, and especially if you're young, age 26 to 34 or 35 to 44, the majority of your respondents have savings there. All buyers, interestingly, when you look at this one, gift from a relative or friend. I never had a relative or friend who gave me money, but if you got one, run with it. About 27% of people, 26 to 34, that's where it comes from. This is mainly just an interesting thing. You've got a tax refund, you've got sale of cryptocurrency floating in there. You've got loan from a financial institution other than a mortgage buying your home. Question yourself as to whether or not that's legal. But as you can see, it's one reason that we're looking at home prices right now are still climbing despite low inventories, because the amount of stuff we have to build is not merely in the thousands, but the tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands and millions of homes that we have to build that we have underbuilt on. Mortgage rates have remained stubbornly high. And what this has done has increased the continued tendency towards unaffordability. And I'll finish off with this topic and I've got a topic on the situation of young men in this country and their disengagement that I'll have to kick for next time. And I'll do my best to put that in there for our webinar in August, if that's okay with these guys. But to answer Albert's question and Colin's question earlier, looking at the markets, they've been great. Sentiment is bad. Markets are good. Our price to earnings ratio, how much companies are actually making relative to the price that they have, the prices are a lot higher than what they're making right now. Even if we look at this way, and they're climbing to a level that means it's unsustainable unless they can make more profits. And then the S&P 500. How big is the top holding of the S&P 500? You can see when we look at Nvidia taking the top spot, nearly 8% of the value of our S&P 500 market is indeed the highest concentration we've seen in a single stock dating back to at least pre-1980. What a time to be alive. Money's concentrated and it's in Nvidia's balance sheet. Now, Google Cloud revenue and operating income. What's interesting about this, and I want to bring this back to the tech hiring paradigm. Look at how this has increased from December 2019 to 2025. Operating revenue is in blue. You can see that steady, amazing increase in Google Cloud revenue. And I understand why, right? Google sends me an email that says, "Do you want to increase your cloud space?" And I realize I'm at 99.999%, and I don't want to take the time or effort to reduce anything that I've got there that I'll never ever look at again. And so I say yes, and I go for it, and I pay for it, and they've got me. And now I'm paying more, gradually more money per month for increasingly larger quantities of terabytes, and so is everybody in the world. And they're not consequently hiring people, but their operating income is rising along with it pretty solidly. They started making money back in March 23, and it has been amazing. They made 2.8 billion. And lastly, but not more funly, wealth insurance. We talk about high income consumers driving the US economy and the way that they do this. Oh my goodness gracious. You know, they've been discouraged now. High wealth consumers, the sentiment is actually down 17% since December. Not as bad as our non high wealth consumers. And how do we know this? We checked the Rolex index. So, how much does a Rolex cost? Back in 2021, the Rolex GMT Master 2 Sprite that I brought from Thornton McGillicuddy III over in Mill Valley was selling for $45,000. Now it's only selling for $11,000. Boo! Look at that. Down the drain when Rolexes are now as common as 8-year-old Kias on the marketplace. Are we seeing a sign of a recession? Who knows?
You
And
got
I'll
to
cover the
invest
rest of this later,
speculatively.
but this is good. We almost made it, but I'll cover a special report on young dudes next time.
I mean, there is an interesting talk, an interesting
That's
thing
absolutely
I
dystopian.
see, which is I believe young male college grads are having the same unemployment rate as young men without college degrees.
Yes.
And I feel like
Yes.
if we're looking for a warning sign, that might be one.
Ah.
And I'm just curious what that goes. I'm in an interesting position where I'm a hiring manager right now.
Good job,
Uh,
Colin. This is great.
Colin
it's
You
has
do it.
made it into the elite class.
no, it sucks. I absolutely hate doing
Oh,
because
and this is a
everyone
recorded
feels so
webinar before you say
qualified,
too
and
much.
I just like, oh man, out of all these qualified candidates, I have to choose one.
I know. Random number generator. That's what
Yeah.
we.
Nah, I
So
actually have to like
we
do
have
my
one more
job and
question.
evaluate their skills.
I know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That's not actually what I do.
We have one
I
more
have somebody
question.
else do a random number generator.
We have a question from the crowd is what if
Oh, yes.
any effect has the alleged billions in revenue?
Ah,
What, if any, effect has the alleged billions in revenue from the tariffs? Or is it a zero-sum game because the tariffs paid by U.S. businesses are being offset by the alleged reduction in the taxes they pay?
oh, that's a good one. So this is good too. This is a good piece of information. We had some very interesting. So I had some links sent to me recently from a couple of folks on here, and we did see. So the revenue from tariffs is indeed increasing, but does that offset the economic damage? And no. So when we look at the economic data on this, whatever we bring in from tariffs, the costs tend to be more in the economy and the way we absorb that in the economy. And so businesses pay it, we pay this tax, right? And it's a bit tax businesses pay, and they typically pass that on to consumers. Now, the interesting part on this is that tariffs are delayed, but they're not gone yet. We didn't beat tariffs because we are see inflation ticking up by 0.1% last month instead of 2%. There is a delay here, and that's the interesting part. And so, yes, we are bringing in money from this, but the costs that businesses are absorbing through reduced outlays, reduced planning, reduced capital are greater. And further to that point, we expect in the next six months in particular, and maybe 9 months, to see some more of these tariff effects come down the line. Our effective tariff rate across the country has gone from about 2% to I think 16% as of right now, and this stands to increase with some of the other tariffs that are floating down the line. And right now, we're still spending on inventories that we bought up in January. The supply chain adjustment takes a long time to take effect. But those prices coming down the line are a worry, and that's also the reason the Fed is just sitting on its hands and saying we're not going to lower rates until we get affirmation that that the tariff effects will be negative. Because if trust me, if we had not had any tariffs, Michael, we would have lowered the rates. And if you want to look at a different way to recognize cost, it would be the benefits that a 0.5% to full percent lower rate reduction we would be receiving right now would be across the economy. So that's another way to damage it. So now you can earn revenue from it, but it costs you another way, and not least geopolitically. This is what a ride. Great question. What else do you guys have for questions? Oh, thanks, Aaron, too. Good to see you. I didn't see you in the audience, Aaron. It's good to see you. It's so quiet out there.
It's
So as
okay.
usual, right? Like given where the trends are now heading, um, and no rate cut in sight, it feels like. What is your advice for job seekers?
Ah, my advice for job seekers is do not lose hope, as I always say. I'm like,
Yeah.
uh, keep on trucking. But here's the deal, too. I mean, it always goes this before. We still have this weirdly unwinding economy that still has a lot of stress in it. You look to the skills that you need, you look to these things. And I would say this, and it would be the advice I would give to back in this question. If you imagine you're looking at, say, the despair felt by the younger men who are in a position right now where they're experiencing higher unemployment rates in the 20 to 24 age range than women are, and they're looking at other things, in which is you've got to find value in yourself and understand yourself and what you do and the value you bring to the table. And it's preachy to say it from a position who has it, from a person who has a job to those that don't. But you have to know what you are and what you are about, and you have to have a firm ability, a guiding factor that guides you in the nature of how you approach life and whatever that may be, and the nature of how you grow as a person. Upskill, make things happen, try outside the box, try different areas. The path you're on may not be the right path and it might change over time. Expect those things. We try to capture in life, like it's molecules of air and it slips through our fingers. You have to go with the flow. You have to engage it. You have to figure out opportunities, network, be aggressive about the way you knock on doors and approach people, but be friendly. Learn about yourself, engage others, stay out there and don't lose hope. And that's the whole thing. Fight until your very last breath leaves you. That's what I would say. That's my advice for job seekers.
And work so hard that you'll get one of those $10 million bonuses from Mark Zuckerberg over at Meta, right?
That's exactly right. Or work hard enough that Colin will hire you.
Have you, that's true. Have you seen those ridiculous salaries
I can't
that,
believe that.
and what is that going to do to Bay Area housing prices?
I know it depends where they live.
They're
Maybe
gonna
they're
like,
coming up.
they're gonna, go to Burlingame and, buy a $2 million house for $10 million and completely reset the market.
I know. You ruined Burlingame. How dare they do that? What did they do this?
It's
It's so close to the airport. Why would you do this, Albert? Why would you? My new neighbors here in Atherton, says Melanie. That's where they think you'll go. That's where their first shot is. No, no.
Yeah.
They're gonna ruin Burlingame.
I'm actually writing a blog post for the company on the changing workforce. Um, my suggestions to job seekers is to understand AI. You can't avoid it anymore. You have to learn how to use it. And I strongly suggest learning systemic design because your future coworkers will be AI agents and your manager will also expect you to use AI
Ooh,
because
yeah.
like that's the first thing I test with the people I'm interviewing is how they're using AI.
Oh,
Um,
good. What's a good? Can you get us insight to one of your questions, Colin? Like, how do
so
you?
I actually have two very important questions. I asked them to show me their ChatGPT if they use it, and then
Oh,
I
wow.
give them a chance to reject this because it's a potentially privacy invasive question. But the question is, please bring up your ChatGPT, and the prompt is, please evaluate me brutally honestly for this position and how well you think I would function in this role. That's prompt number one. Prompt number
Ooh,
two
wow.
is I asked them to ask ChatGPT, please brutally evaluate me on how well I'm using you. This is not something they can prepare an answer for. No one has ever been
Right.
prepared for this question. I'm getting a lot of insight into these people because their ChatGPT knows more about them than I can get out of them in 1 hour. So that's how I'm shortcutting a lot of my understanding of these people. So
Re-
everyone, please be aware that I'm sure I'm not the smartest person, so I'm sure other managers have figured out this is probably
I'm
a
typing in your second question into my own
Oh,
chat.
yes.
yeah.
I got
Everyone should ask their ChatGPT, like evaluate who I am. My favorite questions with ChatGPT is like, based on everything you know about me, what are some hard truths I'm not currently facing? Or what are some and or based on where I want to go in life, what are some things I'm not currently doing that you believe I should do? And rank them based on easy things to do, hard things to do, and things that I should pursue given an opportunity. Something like that. Your ChatGPT is actually a very good genie. You just have to be unbelievably creative with how you use it. But yes. I'm having their ChatGPT out them like be my immediate understanding of who they are when these candidates pull up their ChatGPT. Sometimes they refuse and I totally understand that it might be a privacy problem, so I don't hold it against them if they refuse to show me their ChatGPT answer. But it's something that does help. You might have to be prepared for in the future. This is where you heard it first, guys.
I love this. This is so edgy. Jennifer's
It's a
like,
very
that's not
interesting
legal.
prompt. It's a prompt
That's so
that I expect more hiring managers
funny.
to use. I can't be the only hiring manager using
No.
this. And other things like you have to understand systemic design. In the future, you will be expected to use an AI tool. Jennifer says it doesn't sound legal to do that as an interviewer, which is why I give these people the chance to say, "Hey, if you don't want to show this to me, you're free to not answer it." the
Okay.
question. You're free to not show it to me, right? I give them an out. I don't require it. It's just something I ask them permission. Will you show me your ChatGPT answer to this?
Do they
You
make you
know,
around if they don't, though?
I don't hold it against them if they don't.
are you sure? What's the alternative activity? You have to
Alternative activity
wrestle a
is,
grizzly bear.
I
What is,
mean, at the
what
end
is
of the day, the alternate activities I always receive in resume. I have no problem plugging that resume into an AI and then running through it and saying, evaluate this person's resume
Yeah.
for the job I'm trying to hire them for. Nothing wrong with that. And then I'll run through it with them.
This is really instructive, Colin. I can't tell you how helpful this is to help understanding this is the thing. Modern hiring managers, people, pay
Yeah,
attention.
but yeah. So an ongoing blog post I'm writing is modern hiring managers are not ready for an AI workforce. While everyone's worried about AI taking jobs, managers should worry about the fact that they're not ready to manage AI. That's a skill. Just because you're good at managing people doesn't make you good at managing AI. Because AI, what are you gonna do? Give AI a raise? Here's more electricity. AI does not require motivation. does exactly what you tell it to do. AI is not very creative unless you're creative with it. So there's different skill sets that managers need to integrate and learn if they want to even think about replacing human workers with AI. But because this will probably be mandated by corporate, human managers who are unable to make that adjustment will soon fall by the wayside.
This is good. I like that. This is the kind of I think this is thank you, Colin. I think you've unsettled.
I think some people in the audience are
Oh
very
no,
antsy with
I'm
this
unsettled. I
question. It
understand
should
it.
be
Like my
unsettling, but I don't believe I'm breaking any laws, and I do always give these people say, "Hey, you are free to not answer
right,
this question."
right.
And
No, it sounds
if
fascinating.
I'm breaking, if anyone can point to a law I'm breaking with this question in an interview,
Right.
please send that to me. I would love to know. But I
I think
strongly
you're
believe
breaking a law. I mean, I don't think you're breaking a law, but I think you are.
I
Uh,
can't evaluate this. This is so
you
fun.
are you are writing a rule that
Oh no.
will soon have very like high criticism. And so, you could say that you are a forward thinker, but that forward thinker carries a lot of risks. I don't
Yeah.
know. I
I'm
mean,
sure
look,
it does. I
if you
mean,
want to talk about the future of work, honestly, that's another webinar that I'd love for you to co-lead because I think you'd have a lot to say. Uh,
I I am in the unfortunate position of not only seeing all the latest AI tools that are coming out, I'm also worried about how they will impact things. Um, I strongly do believe AI is a good tool, but it can't replace humans
yeah,
at the end of the day.
yeah, yeah.
I love it.
Well,
I wanted to quickly answer a question that we got. Anonymous attendee said, "Did you mention how men are getting jobs compared more to women, and what's the difference that women are doing more than men are not doing?" And I would have had more chance to go into this, and I'm not taking necessarily, and I don't want you to get the impression. I know that I'm aware of the optics. We're three dudes up here running an economic situation, and I'm very very conscientious about those facts. But we are noting some interesting things that affect everybody in the workforce, and that is the lower outcomes and we'll do a couple of slides in August about this that I have here, but I don't have. So in short, the answer to your question is higher graduation rates and better preparation for careers. So due to a number of factors, men become disengaged, young boys become disengaged from schooling and activities. They're less likely to graduate high school. And right now, women receive about 58% of all bachelor's degrees. Fundamentally, what does education do? It buys you choice in career pathways, choice in approach. And so you have a series of men that are a generation of men in this category where these outcomes are actually declining. And we're going to talk about a little bit in a couple of slides of things that worked and things that didn't work to try to reverse this. And this is not a focus, and the focus has been, of course, correctly on women and feminism. And I think that I also want to state that this particular issue is interesting because it's affecting, and I have a son myself who's 11, and so I have to think about this in great detail. And it's affecting especially HEAL sectors, which are health, education, literacy occupations. We've seen a great gender disparity there where the career pathway has become more concentrated with women rather than men, and men become disengaged, and become they become disengaged, they misattribute that blame often to the things that have happened happened in the last 50 years. And there are other ways and processes to get these young men re-engaged productively into society. So it's an interesting question. So we'll talk a little bit about that for August. So bring your critiques and questions then.
All right. Well, Dr. White, I guess if you have any final last thoughts, I think as
Yeah.
we head into August, it's definitely not the year I imagined it to be, but it's also been
No.
a very interesting year.
A little better. I mean, this is the hard part. It's just like you're waiting for the shoe to drop, but but I'd expect right now, I expect more uncertainty in geopolitical environments, more
Yeah.
tariff issues. I think that it's still unknown as to whether the hiring market will see this, but I think we're going to see more inflationary effects in the months ahead from the tariffs, but we will see how this pans out, everybody. So stay engaged, stay cool, and thank you for joining us for almost 2 hours on a magnificent Thursday evening and
Yeah.
getting
Thanks,
prepared.
everyone. We hope to see you next month.
Yeah. Train ChatGPT to think you're awesome.
Yeah.
That's the
And then,
moral.
yeah, hey, you might feel weird about it, but I thought of this and I was like, this is a great question. And
It's a really, I'm going to do it right now and I'm going to see what happens.
Yeah.
I have so much to talk about when it comes to AI because, oh my God. But yeah, maybe we need to have a separate webinar at Albert.
I will message you after this. And in the meantime, I want to thank everybody for showing up today. We always enjoy having many of you here. Invite a friend next time, invite your town, invite your neighborhood. We have a lot to say, and there's a lot of important information for job seekers. We'll be following up after this with a recording, and we look forward to seeing you soon on Wednesday, August the 27th for our July report. And in the meantime, we've got lots of webinars in between as well if you're interested in job search, AI, and side hustles. All right, see y'all soon. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.